In all the literature on Marian consecration, it seems to be commonly the case that the belief that it's through Mary and through this consecration in particular and devotion to her that the great saints are made great saints, that those graces that God wishes to give to those who are called to high sanctity are passed through the hands of Mary in a special way, and that there's a nearness of the saints as children of Mary. Now, one of the great favorites of the 20th century, the saints, is Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, the little flower, right? So she wrote the story of a soul, and it's her autobiography. If you've never read it, it's a good read. If you read it once and didn't think too much of it, read it again, because you've missed something. It is a very humble text in a lot of ways. It's also very magnanimous, and it sums up a lot of spirituality in pretty short order. Over and over again, as I continue to read about mystical theology and things, I come back to her over and over again for a very succinct, very personalized, and very friendly and beautiful way of summing it up. Now, a few things I wanted to share with you, because I've already shared a little bit about Saint Thérèse of Lisieux and her devotion to Mary. In particular, I noted how she says that it was tough. It cost her a lot to pray a rosary. And so some of you have asked me more about that, and so I'll read it to you. But I also wanted to talk about her consecration, because she did a consecration to Mary as well. And she also has a practice in her reception of the Eucharist that is very much her own, but it reflects a little bit of St. Louis de Montfort's mode of receiving communion. And St. Louis de Montfort says in his Mariology that when the Holy Spirit comes to a soul who has Mary close at hand and within, if he goes and finds Mary there, then he brings forth Christ with greater fruit. Now I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically the idea, right? And Jesus coming to us, if he finds us conformed to his mother, that was where he chose to dwell. And so he's coming to us and dwelling there too. So there's a Marian element about even reception of the Eucharist, that Christ is within us and living within us, and that in some ways we're Marian, and so conforming to her all the more. And so at Holy Communion, St. Louis de Montfort said there's before communion and after communion, there are longer prayers, and it's in true devotion and the practices. But I just want to read you a little bit of this so you hear it, and then you can hear some of Thérèse of Lisieux. He says that after Holy Communion, inwardly recollected and holding your eyes shut, you will introduce Jesus into the heart of Mary. You will give him to his mother, who will receive him lovingly, will place him honorably, and will adore him profoundly, will love him perfectly, will embrace him closely, and will render to him in spirit and in truth many homages which are unknown to us in our thick darkness. So this entrusting Jesus into Mary within one's heart at the reception of the Eucharist is really a beautiful image. And so what does Thérèse do? How does she do that? She does this. I'm going to the wrong spot. There we go. Oh, no. Is that it? No. Sorry. She does this. She says, before she talks about having not received very many consolations in communion, she says, that's not the reason I've given myself over to Christ, is to receive consolations, but to give them. She says, I conceive of my soul as an empty field, and I pray to the Blessed Virgin to take away the debris that could prevent it from being empty. Then I implore her to raise up herself a vast tent worthy of heaven, to decorate it with her own finery. And then I invite all the saints and the angels to come make a magnificent concert. It seems to me, when Jesus comes down into my heart, that he is content to find himself so well received there, and I am also happy. So Thérèse of Lisieux's spin on communion in a Marian way. And she consecrated herself to Mary at an early age. She says, in the afternoon, I was the one who pronounced the act of consecration to the Blessed Virgin. It was quite just that I should speak in the name of my classmates to the Mother in heaven, I who had been deprived so young of my earthly mother. She's speaking of consecration to Mary around her first communion. So her classmates, these are first communion classmates. And she says, I put my whole heart into speaking to her, to consecrating myself to her, like a child who throws herself into her mother's arms and asks her to watch over her. It seems to me that the Blessed Virgin must have gazed at her little flower and smiled at her. Now, prior to this, she had had a miraculous healing in which she had a vision of Mary smiling at her from a statue that was in her room. She says, wasn't she the one whom she had cured with a visible smile? Hadn't she placed into the chalice of her little flower her Jesus, the flower of the fields, the lily of the valley? And so she consecrated herself to Mary, and we see she makes reference to it pretty regularly, not only in communion, but even later when she's looking when she's talking about how God has helped her grow in humility. She says, I'm too little to turn beautiful phrases in order to make you believe that I have a great deal of humility. I prefer to concur quite simply that the Almighty has done great things in the soul of the child of his divine mother, Luke 1:49. And the greatest is to have shown her how little, how powerless she is. And so at that, I'll conclude by talking a little bit about the Rosary and her pain at this because I find it close to my own heart. She says, when I'm all alone, I'm ashamed to admit the recitation of the Rosary cost me more than one instrument of penance. I feel that I say it so poorly. It's in vain that I attempt to meditate on the mysteries of the Rosary. I don't succeed in engaging my mind. For a long time, I was extremely sorry for this lack of devotion that surprised me, because I love the Blessed Virgin so much that it ought to be easy for me to pray in her honor, prayers that are pleasing to her. Now I'm less sorry because I think that since the Queen of Heaven is my mother, she must see my goodwill and is happy with it. Sometimes when my mind is in such dryness that it's impossible for me to pull a thought out of it to unite myself to God, I very slowly recite an Our Father and a Hail Mary. Then those prayers delight me. They nourish my soul more than if I had recited them hurriedly 100 times. So with that, some Marian consecration, Mariology, and devotion from Thérèse Lisieux, patron saint of missions, doctor of the church, and a good friend to you and to me. So I hope that your consecration is going, your preparation is going well, and I'll talk to you again soon.